I'm a Bengali, and in Bangla there is a word called Golpo. It's the Bengali word for story. Now, my association with the word story or Golpo started a long time back when I was a little girl. And so perhaps everything that I do has goes with the word Golpo, or every kind of a story that I'm chasing always has the word Golpo. You see, Golpo is a very unique word. It is both a noun and a verb. So in Bangla, if we say that Amra Golpo Korchi, it's like we are having a conversation. And one can also say, Ami ekta golpo shonai. Let me tell you a story. Now, in both these usage of the word golpo, you can see that it is a very intrinsic part of human conversations or of human life. And that's why everything at Your Story Bag and everything that I do as a storyteller keeps that basic tenet or the similarity that we are surrounded by stories, and every time we communicate, we are essentially sharing stories with one another. So Golpo Project has been this internal exercise for me every year to focus on a few things as far as my endeavor as a storyteller are concerned. So whether it is about applying the rules of storytelling in my business or in my work, in my approach, in my trainings, it is also now to bring more and more people into the realm of storytelling so that they understand that is as effortless as breathing. It's as simple as even talking and sharing or communicating with anyone. And if you were to do it, if you were to communicate with anyone, you could begin by a story, and it's very simple. So one of the things which I have done, or rather I have grown up with, is that a story can be a basic tool to connect with someone and share something about your life. So personal storytelling has been very close for us at home, because I have grown up to a host of stories from my parents, stories that my father told me about his boarding school, stories about my grandfather who I never saw. My mother told me stories of her upbringing, of all the stories that she could not fulfill in her life. So the ambitions that she had or the life that she imagined for herself. And all of these stories, these personal stories of my parents and their families, sort of shaped the person who I am. Going on, I was a journalist. So as a journalist, I went on to gather stories and help other people, or to extract stories from people and tell it to the world. So personal stories has been very close to me, and I consider myself more than a storyteller. I'm a story digger and an extractor, because I love spotting stories in my environment, and I know that everyone around us, including you who's watching this video, will have stories to tell. So this year, early this year, I said, let me make another project of mine public, which is of documenting 365 days with 365 stories. I don't know how many of you remember, but there was this film called Bluff Master. And in Bluff Master, there is the character of Boman Irani, who is a doctor, and a fake doctor, and he goes and there is this one very fascinating scene next to the gateway of India where he tells Abhishek Bachchan that, Roy, how many days in the year do you remember, special days, like that day when you learnt your bicycle for the first time you fell in love, or your heart was broken, your first salary, your first job, your first win. How many of these special days in your life do you remember? And how many of these days make your life, your entire life, worthy of being remembered? Just beginning with that scene, if you've seen that film, or if you've seen that scene, I want you to think of it in your life too. How many days do you really remember? We live through countless experiences. We meet people, we talk to people, we engage with people. There are strangers who we befriend. There are strangers who help us get from one point to the other. There are such beautiful experiences, ordinary experiences that we have. Sometimes a good laugh, sometimes a good cry, a failure, nothing very big. Don't have to be really earth-changing or life-changing kind of experiences. All of us are normal human beings. We come from normal families. We are not celebrities. But even then, in our everyday life, there are tucked so many of these everyday, ordinary experiences that can become extraordinary stories. So I, sometime about 2 years back, I started listing out, very simple story prompts that would get people to start thinking and diving into their own personal stories. And I've used some of these prompts in many of my workshops, especially for adults. And it really gets them to think and extract these untold stories which they have never shared with their work colleagues. and amazing things have happened. So somewhere there I started writing these prompts, and this year, without any preparation, without any fanfare, without even announcing it to anyone, I said, let me just do this year differently. Let me myself document a story every single day, because that's what I do as a storyteller. Let me document a story and do it mindfully. And so therefore it started that I'll share it with the rest of the world, and let's see how many people get on to this bandwagon of documenting a story every day. And so far so good. It's been 1 month and 31 days, and I'm very happy to say that I could document nearly 95% of these stories, because of course sometimes the day is very busy and you wind up being so tired at the end of the day that putting that story down on paper becomes somewhat of a task. And I totally understand if it happens to everyone. I encourage you, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you do, no matter what your life is, what your profession is, try picking up these prompts. Spend a day looking at the prompt, recalling a specific day in your life, a specific instance in your life, a person, recollect a place, recollect an emotion, recollect an event or an action that happened, something that you saw, something that happened to you, something that you saw in others, something that you may have heard from someone. Try documenting that story with this prompt. Go back to that story with this prompt and recollect it and retell it with a new perspective, with the perspective that you are today. So if it's a story that happened to you when you were 15, today, no matter what age you are, you will look back at that incident a bit differently. So that's the exercise. I encourage you, I welcome you to try personal storytelling, to try to journal your life with these stories which have happened to you and you may have forgotten. Now, there are many merits to doing it, and this is something which I have experienced in this 1 month of doing it dedicatedly, and I'd like to share with you. One of them is that it is unlocking lots of untold stories, and with it, the forgotten emotions that went behind these stories. For example, the story of my of the medal, which I had almost forgotten. I did not remember it, and I've never told that story to anyone in so many years, but it was my mother who had preserved that story, and so I went and told it again. So the medal story, it's also about acknowledging the right kind of people who've shaped our stories. So my love story with my husband is one of them. I've got so much of love, so much of positive feedback for having shared that story about my companion, which is my husband, and that story is again one of those stories which gave me this platform to really acknowledge the kind of person he is, or acknowledge the other character in my story. I'm not the hero, it's my husband who's the hero. Stories which have the potential to, in fact, for me or for somebody else to look at life from another point of view. I had a beautiful story sent by a friend about how life was like when she first got married, and how she had to give up on something which she valued very dearly. This story gave me a change in perspective, from where I come from and where she comes from. So when she shared that story to me, I understand that the same prompt can trigger so many different, diverse, conflicting, contrasting emotions and memories in people's, and it just adds perspective to the way I look at a life, or the way I respond to a certain stimuli. And that's what the story does. If you share it with others, if you share the prompt with others, somebody else is likely to throw up or share another story with you, which is nothing compared to what you have shared. And there in itself is the beauty of how a simple word, a simple phrase can take us back to different parts of our lives, and yet we have something common to share. Personal storytelling is the great exercise, or this journaling every single day is a great exercise to practice authenticity. Now, this is where I think I've experienced it. I'm a storyteller, and a large part of my work is to really tell stories the way they are. Not, of course, by coloring them or making them seem larger than life, but just enjoying that little truthful moment with myself of recounting that story and sharing it with the world. Now, of course, somebody along this journey told me that it's easier for you, Rituparna, because you're an extrovert. You can go and talk endlessly about yourself because you're not afraid of what people will think. Yes, this is a journey that I have made. From being somebody who's very private, I still am very private, and I do consider myself as a private person who does not share everything about herself. I only share that which I think will help somebody connect with me, and it's useful for me to connect on the basis of a common shared experience, which is a story. But I don't share everything about my personal life, and therefore, in that moment when I am sharing a story about me, myself, I am also trying to get people to think and understand that you can craft the narrative of yourself in front of other people. It is perfectly fine if you do not want to share these stories publicly, but by just recalling a story from your life, you will be doing something like being absolutely mindful, authentic, honest, truthful, vulnerable to yourself in that moment. Now, most of these stories I share the prompt sometime in the day, and this prompt, obviously I must confess, some of these prompts are written because I do have a story with that prompt. But at the same time, for some prompts, I spend an entire day thinking about which story I will tell, or rather how will I tell that. So I spend that day, and I recommend that if you're picking up any of the prompts, go ahead and spend a day with a couple of let's say minutes on it, or maybe a half an hour on it. Recall that incident, put together the narrative, put together all the details, splice it up and or spruce it up with a lot of things which make it visible, or which connect with somebody else, and then tell that story at the end of the day. I choose to tell these stories at the end of the day because for me it's a good winding down process. There's so much of time that we for somebody who's working is spending a lot of day in meetings and calls and doing assignments and in wrapping up projects. I'm also consuming a lot of stories, whether by reading it, watching it, consuming so much of content. At the end of the day, I feel it's the perfect end to the day where I'm just winding down and I'm recalling a story and telling it the way I want to. Sometime back, I also started thinking that a lot of us talk about bedtime stories. So for me, this is the bedtime ritual that I have brought in. I typically write these stories, and if you're following me on social media and the stories which are out there, you will see that the stories come pretty late in the night. But that's how it is. I want to end my day with this story. It's also another way of looking at it, that this could be the good morning story for somebody else who would come back to my handle to search for how did Rituparna tell her story for this prompt. So I'm hoping that wherever you are, if you come back to my Instagram or to my YouTube channel, which I hope I hope to put out more of these stories as videos so that you can connect with me and tell me what you think. And at the same time, I hope by just sharing my story, by telling my story, you will be inspired to tell yours. There are many ways that you can use these stories. I use a lot of these in my workshops and my facilitations, but then I'm a storyteller. For me, a story is a great product by itself. If I can use a story to explain something, as far as storytelling is concerned, it makes it very easy. But so can you. Whether you are a teacher, you are a professor, you are a manager, a leader, a business owner, whether you're into sales, marketing, communication, if you're a coach, any of these stories, any of these prompts, you are free to interpret it from your personal, from your social, from your professional life, and you can go and tell a story which will help you communicate a key message to your listener. There are ways to do that, and if you want some help, go and look up ABC of Storytelling, where I give you a host of other ideas of how you can package your story and make it meaningful to convey something to your listener. Now, this exercise, documenting 365 days and 365 stories, is an exercise to help you enjoy the art of storytelling. You may not go into finding out who am I going to tell this story to, and how will this story be a strategic tool for me to communicate or to connect with a potential stakeholder or potential listener. We're not getting into that. But if you're if you are adventurous, you can use your personal stories in varied circumstances and use it as a power tool. So I recommend you try your hands at that as well. But if nothing else, Take it as an exercise to wind your day, sit down, relax, spend some quality time with yourself so that you can find a story which is a precious story, which is a story which gives you joy, a story which gives you a lot of satisfaction, a story which gives you a lot of strength, a lot of hope, a lot of faith in life as it is. So go ahead and document your stories. We have another month coming up, and I'm going to do this through the rest of the year, 365 days and 365 stories. That's my Golpo Project 2022. And I thought perhaps it's good to explain to everybody what's my vision for this. We're going to have some fun events through the latter half of the year. I hope to document some of your stories on my podcast, which is called What's in Your Story Bag. Go up and look it up. It's been on a pause, but I hope to revive it because I'm looking for fresh stories, real stories, stories about real people like you and me, ordinary people with ordinary stories, yet extraordinary emotions in them. So if you have a great story, remember to tag Your Story Bag and Rituparna.storyteller on Instagram or wherever you can find me. I'm across the platform. So go ahead and tag me in your stories. I'll go looking for you and I will ask for your story for my podcast. Through the year, you can also use these prompts in your living room, at home. If you want to shut down your TV and not really watch anything that evening, go ahead, pick any of these prompts, ask everyone at home, gather everyone around in your dinner table or your living room, ask them to share their own story with these prompts. Make it into a game, use it in your workspace, back-to-back Zoom meetings or back-to-back meetings behind a mask. Just maybe reveal the true faces, the true identities of people through these stories. Have some fun at your workspace or in your home. And I hope you enjoy this entire exercise of documenting your story. If you need any help, if you need a good listener, remember this person is a very good listener. So I will be very happy to hear your story. Until the next time, happy storytelling.